The historical record of the Christian Gospels contains a specific chronological gap. Between the resurrection and his final departure, the texts describe a 40-day window. The events recorded in this window break the laws of physics. In the Gospel of John, chapter 20, a physical entity reportedly appears inside a sealed, locked room without traversing the walls or the door. Yet the same text goes out of its way to establish extreme material density. The entity consumes cooked fish and offers physical wounds for tactile inspection. Historical analysis struggles with this duality. Traditional categorization fails here, as the entity possesses both the ethereal quality of a ghost and the biological requirements of a living body. These physical anomalies are not necessarily mythological errors. They function as specific data points that suggest the need for an entirely new ontological framework to decipher what was actually being observed. Two prevailing historical models have attempted to explain this data. The first is biological resuscitation, the idea that the resurrection was simply the reanimation of dead cellular tissue. The textual data rejects this. Previously resuscitated figures in these accounts, like Lazarus, remained bound by three-dimensional spatial physics and eventually died again. The opposing model is psychological hallucination, or demythologization. This reduces the event to the internal, subjective experiences of the disciples. The behavior recorded suggests a third possibility, a dimensional phase transition. The entity appears to be operating under the constraints of higher dimensional physics. Throughout this investigation, we will use modern space-time physics as a heuristic analogy. The goal is to translate a first-century paradox into a logic accessible to 21st-century intuition. To understand how an object might bypass a locked door, we turn to Edwin Abbott's 1884 thought experiment, Flatland. Imagine a universe of only two dimensions. The inhabitants can perceive length and width, but they possess zero concept of depth, or the direction we call above. If a three-dimensional sphere moves downward through this plane, it creates a unique geometric intersection. The two-dimensional observer sees a dot spontaneously appear, grow into a circle, and then shrink to nothing. They are only seeing a cross-section of a larger reality. This same logic applies to the locked room in the Gospel of John. A four-dimensional entity can enter a three-dimensional room from a vector the walls do not enclose. To a 3D observer, it looks like walking through a wall. To a 4D entity, the wall was never in the way. When the entity vanishes at Emmaus, we are seeing the withdrawal of a higher dimensional projection from our specific three-dimensional spatial slice. The miraculous apparitions recorded in the Gospels follow the mathematical rules of a 4D object intersecting a 3D space. This geometry also addresses the forensic details of the empty tomb. The Gospel of John notes that the burial linens were lying there in their original shape, rather than being unwrapped or torn open. In three spatial dimensions, you cannot remove a solid core from a closed knot without physically breaking the loop. This is where we encounter the mathematical concept of topological unknotting. If you add a fourth spatial degree of freedom, a closed loop can be resolved and its contents removed without any physical intersection or tearing. This mathematical proof perfectly aligns with the textual observation of the empty, but still perfectly formed burial shroud. The empty tomb presents the precise topological signature of a dimensional phase transition. This leads to the mechanical question of how an information-bearing pattern, or essence, navigates the barrier of biological death. In quantum tunneling, particles confront energy barriers not as absolute limits, but as probabilistic pathways. The particle's wave-like nature allows it to transition to a new state on the other side of the barrier without technically climbing over it. Scaling this up to string theory, we can model our universe as a three-dimensional brain floating within a higher dimensional bulk. In this model, separate realms are not spatially distant, they are dimensionally overlapping. Biological death and physical resurrection can both be understood as perpendicular phase transitions into these perfectly overlapping dimensional brains. Mapping the entirety of these events into a single mathematical grammar reveals a striking symmetry. The incarnation, or kenosis, functions as an inward dimensional projection. a higher dimensional reality limiting itself to a single three-dimensional coordinate. The ascension follows as the outward phase transition, where the entity sheds the limitations of a localized coordinate. This moves the entity from a localized particle state into a non-local, omnipresent field state that saturates the spatial grid. If the ascension established an omnipresent field, then the second coming is the final, full unveiling of a reality that is already present. This model of an overlapping field is preserved in the theology of ancient Ethiopian mysticism. The vertical geography of the Ethiopian highlands protected these traditions from the standardizing influence and political consolidation of the Roman Church. Early Ethiopian texts, such as the Book of the Covenant, describe a reality that exists alongside our own, rather than in a distant sky. Their tripartite model, body, soul, and spirit, was viewed as an internal alignment designed to interface with this overlapping divine field. In this framework, prayer functions as an immediate quantum resonance within a shared dimensional space. Ancient mysticism and modern geometry suggest that divine reality occupies the same coordinates as our own, separated only by a shift in dimensional perception. Reality is intimately and immediately here.